Hello, everybody, and welcome to Teaching Writing in College, where the driving question is how can instructors in higher education leverage theory, science, pedagogy, and craft most effectively to help their learners with writing? I am very glad to be back. It's been a little bit over a year. I have to apologize. A little bit over a year since I have posted an episode of the podcast. I had some ambitious plans last summer, and some things got in the way. And then also, I've been working to wrap up a project, an encyclopedia on teaching writing for transfer, which has gone out for peer review. And with that, I have a little bit more time to work on this. And so I am glad to be back. And uh, we'll just kind of see how the summer goes as far as episodes. And then, of course, in the fall, I hope to uh, be a little bit more regular, but I have some plans for things I would like to do this summer. And one thing that I wanted to start doing a little bit more was to reflect on Gen AI because I haven't done a lot of that yet. I did uh, early on in the podcast. You might remember some episodes there. But this one I've been thinking about for a few months. My title is Gen AI could turn education into an illusion, but do we have to let it? And so this is a reflection on an article from the Chronicle of Higher Education that caught my eye from March 19th, 2025, called In the Age of AI, Is Education Just an Illusion? We Are in the Midst of a Crisis of Purpose by Dan Sarofian-Butin. I hope I said the name right there. I apologize if I didn't. But there's a screenshot of the article, and I thought it was worth reflecting on a bit, something that I think is really important for us these days as teachers are writing to do, especially since AI is now part of the water that we swim in. And so it caught my eye. There were some ideas in there that I thought were kind of interesting, and I would just like to kind of address those ideas. And so, just to overview, a brief overview of those ideas. In the Age of AI, Is Education Just an Illusion? By Dan Sarofian-Butin. Um, Education, these are some of this is an overview of the ideas, some of the main ideas from that article from March 19th. So the first one is educational practices are now like kayfabe in pro wrestling. The idea that everything is staged and everyone understands that. It's a form of entertainment uh, in which participants, I'm sorry if I have a typo there, in which participants just pretend that a competition is taking place for both athletes and fans. So it's just pretend everybody's in on the fun, and it's meant to be an illusion. And then some of the narrative is just basically students go through motions without real engagement in the classroom, or sometimes don't even go through the motions, yet submit well polished, high quality assignments. And that, of course, is the main worry kind of behind AI that we probably all have experienced by now. Both student and professor knew a paper was written. So this is part of his narrative, where he himself was talking to a student. They both knew the paper was written by AI, but the student insisted it wasn't, and the professor looked the student in the eye and gave the paper an A. So that was just part of the narrative that Dan Sarofian-Butin shared in that article. And then we've run out of tools to fight it, and the thing left to do is to pretend. And so that's uh, some of them. Those are some of the main ideas that caught my attention. And so I'd like to kind of go through those because I don't necessarily think that we have to let education be an illusion simply because AI exists and students are going to use it. And so here are my thoughts on that. The first is that this is kind of an old problem. It's not a problem of attention. Or it is a problem. I'm sorry. It is a problem of attention, not necessarily a problem of AI. So when I think about my own undergraduate education, for example, I remember sitting in classrooms and not learning too much, maybe struggling to learn something. I remember being an English major in a class on literary theory. A lot of it was just going over my head, and I did go through the motions. I wrote the paper. I didn't always complete the homework. I was probably much like uh, students that we all encounter. back then. And so, and I had other things that were kind of taking up my attention as a young person. And I know that our students go through that too. One thing I remember really specifically to get closer to technology in 2004, this is uh, when I was getting my PhD at Arizona State University. I had been teaching there for a few years. Maybe it was 2005, but I remember this Laddie F. Core Hall building was dedicated there on the ASU campus. And the thing about the Laddie F. Core Hall was that all of the rooms had one computer per student. And so, there was, I remember rows and rows of desks with laptops that folded out. They had these fold out desktops with laptops in there for every single student. And you enrolled a certain number of students. Each student was uh, guaranteed a laptop in that classroom, or in some cases, desktop computers. And I remember early on when I was teaching in that, and as soon as all the students had computers, it got so much harder to interact with them because all they really wanted to do was stare at their screens. I would try to put them into groups, especially with desktop computers. I would try to put them into groups, and they had these little pods, with maybe four desktop computers, four spots for students to sit in, and they were facing each other in a little square, and they just would not look at each other. Everything, the screen was front and center for their attention. And the same thing with laptops. And it just made it so much harder to interact with them. And I just remember feeling like I was not being listened to or paid attention to in a way that I was before that. A few years earlier, I started teaching in 1999. And I kind of saw that evolution, when uh, they were encouraging us to take students to computer labs, and then eventually, like with Laddie F. Core Hall, they started putting computer labs in there, or giving students computers while they were in the classroom. And then, of course, students started bringing their own laptops all the time. And I really just remember the dynamic changing there. And so the idea here is just simply that technology can and has for a long time kind of gotten between, uh, kind of become sort of a center point of attention for students, even in our classrooms. And so that was something that I remember quite a bit from my own experience as an educator. And so I identified some questions that I'd like to introduce, questions that I feel like we have to ask ourselves. It is sometimes, we often feel like we can spot AI. It can be hard to hold students responsible for it because it is difficult to prove. And so we're worried that students aren't learning. Of course, that's a very important concern because we want them to benefit from what we do in the classroom, and we want them to be able to carry that on and use it later. It's a benefit for them. And so some questions that I thought of that were kind of sparked by reading the Chronicle article back in March was this. First one is, we have to ask ourselves, what are our teaching goals? What do we want students to know and be able to do? How do people learn? Are our assessments actually good assessments given our teaching goals? Do students get sustained exposure and practice over time? And what do we do in the classroom to achieve those goals in relation to the way learning works? And so we have to go back and ask ourselves, how does learning work? What are our teaching goals? How do people learn in the first place? And so on and so forth. Um, so some of these questions seem to answer other ones. I'm just going to kind of go through them a little bit. But, we have, how do people learn? Well, one of the ways that they learn is through practice. And so another later question is, do students get sustained exposure and practice over time? And so these questions are just kind of informal, just ones that I thought would be worth thinking about in light of the Chronicle article. And so first thing is, what are our teaching goals? What do we want students to be able to do? And so I think the main thing for writing courses, rhetoric is important. And from rhetoric, we can get some conceptual knowledge about writing and how writing works. Writing strategies that support genre are really important, and students' uses of genres. So, invention for content, strategies for structure, strategies for style. I think I've covered all of those things on the podcast before. There are lots of different kinds of strategies you can give for each of those. And then, of course, the main one is genre. And then engaging with audience expectations and needs, that's something we want them to be able to do. We want to adapt writing strategies to various genres and audiences. And so knowing those things, at least for us, is really important. So for me personally, I feel like I have to be clear about to myself about the rhetorical concepts and writing strategies before the semester begins. I have to say, okay, these are the things that I want students to learn. These are the things that I think are going to really help them the most. And then I focus on those. My teaching goal becomes helping them learn about and then use and adapt those strategies. One really important quote that I feel like has stuck with me for a long time from Daniel T. Willingham is the brain learns things that it consistently focuses on. And it's from the book, Why Don't Students Like School? I remember about 10 years ago, I got uh, something came over my Facebook feed recommending, summer reads for teachers. And this was one of them. So I went and bought it and read it. And this line in the book has really kind of changed the way that I think about teaching. The brain learns things that it consistently focuses on. And so that's kind of become an important guiding principle for me in my classrooms. I don't always do it perfectly, of course, but uh, knowing that I have to try to, kind of keep focus maintained on what we're learning is really helpful. Are our assessments actually good assessments given our teaching goals? So Dan Sarofian-Butin argued that reading his students' work, their larger writing projects, is one of the few mechanisms I have to know whether I am teaching something well and whether my students are getting it. And so the idea there is, you've got this written project and you've spent some time working on it, maybe weeks, and then there's that culminates that those weeks culminate into this project, and then that's where you do the assessment of learning. And one thing that I have just learned over my career is that it's really helpful to think about what's going on between the beginning of a project and before they actually turn that assessment in. And I started my own career, of course, like a lot of folks do, where I had to ask myself, how much weight do I give to each assignment? Do I do 3 or 4 projects, written projects in a semester, these bigger projects? And then what do we do in between to work up to those? And then I mostly, most of the grade, most of the idea that students are going to be assessed and that they're going to learn something comes from my interaction with that project and or when I'm trying to grade it. And so I think that's an important lesson that I've learned over the years is that, you know, having that culminating project can be important, but also having a sort of a focus of my own on, what's getting up to that project is really important, or what's leading to that project for students. What kinds of things am I doing with them in the classroom? And am I paying attention to their learning as we do that? Am I looking for learning in other ways? And, just in everyday interactions with them. That really helps. So I feel like there are more than just a few mechanisms that we have to know whether I'm teaching something well and whether my students are getting it. A lot of times for me, that does come down to in-person conversations with students. If I'm in the classroom and I'm walking around and I'm engaging with them and asking them what they're doing with whatever learning we're doing, or I'm just watching students work together and just kind of listening in on their conversations from a distance, I can tell, whether what's happening is leading to learning. And so even if we're teaching writing, our larger writing projects, good assessments of what we've been teaching students. And I think in a lot of cases, they're really not. We have high stakes assignments and then shortest route to a grade. That's really what these larger assessments lead to. If you've got uh, a midterm exam and a final exam, um, you've got these high stakes assignment, and then everybody's going to want to take the shortest route to get there. What's the shortest route to get to that grade? And so that leads to things like writing the paper the night before, or nowadays maybe prompting Chat GPT the night before. And it's kind of a one-shot effort for a lot of points. And so students are going to invest most of their effort just into completing that project. You know, if they're supposed to be completing it on their own time, and that's where they're going to want to. That's where the reward is. The points are in that project. If the points are not in the interactions in the classroom, then that's not where their focus is going to be. And so I guess what I'm trying to say here is that writing projects don't represent sustained, varied, interleaved practice over time. That's something that somebody needs if they're going to learn something well. And so they just represent that one-shot effort. The presence of AI means that there's no need for a sustained attention, or excuse me, sustained attention, and a lump sum of points will kind of set students' priorities for them. And we're kind of showing them priorities. They're saying, okay, this is, and I remember doing this, um, I still do it. This is an assignment, and it's worth a lot of points because there are things in here that you're supposed to learn, and it's in that assignment that you're going to demonstrate to me that you have learned them. And so when we put the points there, that's where students are going to put their effort. Let's see, next question. Do students get sustained exposure and practice over time in relation to our teaching goals? Um, One story that I really like too comes from Make It Stick. You might remember that book, or you might have heard of that book too. There's a chapter in there, chapter two. There's the story of political science professor Andrew Sobel. Make It Stick is another one that I have come across, in my travels. It probably came across my social media feed, and I ended up reading it too. But I was really kind of intrigued by this. Professor Sobel uh, found he did a few different things, just he was frustrated by the way that his students were responding to what he was to his assignments and things. He had a midterm and then a final. Students were not showing up, and he had unpredictable pop quizzes. He tried to solve the problem with unpredictable pop quizzes, and the students hated that. He got skewered on end of course surveys for it, and they just don't like that lack of predictability. And I've experimented with some of that, and I know that students don't like it. So, I eventually had to stop doing it myself. But that last one, predictably scheduled quizzes throughout the semester, which replaced the exams, he saw an uptick in attendance, and he saw qualitatively better work from students. And this is an anecdote from him, but it really, makes a lot of sense. You help students with a little bit of predictability. You take those points and you spread them throughout the semester, and then they have to spend more sustained effort over a longer period of time, and the result turns out to be better. And so that's something that I really think is important, especially when it comes to AI. You want the students to be able to uh, do things over a period of time. So that's how we all learn. We all learn over a period of time and repeated engagement. What do we do in the classroom to achieve those goals in relation to the way learning works? And so some of these things on the left, these were things from the Chronicle of Higher Education article by Dan Sarofian-Butin. One was student, this typical, we all have seen this. My laptop ran out of battery, or a student playing Sudoku. We always get those students whose laptops run out of battery. They feel like they can't work anymore, or a student playing Sudoku. I have had students do things like watch Dexter on Netflix, and I've had to ask them to stop, things of that nature. I mean, that's been going on for a long time. Um, Chat GPT, just based on his article, it can fully subvert a student's opportunity to learn simply because all they have to do is wait until it's time, and they can just type in a prompt and get a written product. Higher education has been reduced to an illusion, he says, in which students and instructors alike just pretend that actual learning is taking place. And so all of that's going on kind of in our classrooms these days. And so my recommendations are, as far as participation, a higher weight. I would probably put a weight of 70%, at least, for in a writing course. I would kind of flip it, and for most of my career, I would say that my writing assignments, and sometimes there have been policies in writing programs where the major written projects need to be worth at least 70% of the grade, because it's a writing class. You're supposed to demonstrate your writing. And so you do these writing projects. And to demonstrate that, that's the idea. But this flips it. So for participation, we have a higher weight of maybe 70%. And so that's just to get that sustained attention from students. Lesson plans and activities. Are activities giving students opportunities to practice? Are they actually practicing? One of the things that I do now, and I actually was doing this long before ChatGPT hit the scene, I have had my students do their work on paper, their participation on paper, and I will give them things to practice. We will practice rhetorical strategies. We'll practice argumentation strategies or structure strategies. We'll practice actually defining the names of those strategies, and then we'll also practice going through students schedules. I'll have them go through their schedules and find assignments that they'll be doing in the future and asking themselves, okay, where are you going to use one of these strategies, or where could you use one of these strategies, or there's an opportunity to use one of these strategies in something that you're doing in another class. And so I have them write those things down, and I give them participation credit based on that. Usually what I'll do is I'll choose one. So there's a little element of randomness in there again that they don't usually like. But I will have them uh, do that on paper, which I've done for a while. And I think that helps. It helps them get a better sense of what they're doing. It gives them an opportunity to focus on that. Kind of like I like to compare that to exercise, where you spend some time doing the thing, and that is what builds your ability to do it again later. Also, one that's been really important for me for many years now is classroom assessment techniques, CATs. Talking to students instead of, about their laptop batteries, it's what writing strategies would you say apply to this activity or project? Or what was your approach to this writing problem I just gave you? Or where do you see yourself using this skill in your other classes? I will say that as a teacher, questions like that, conversations like that with students have been really helpful in my understanding of whether they're learning something. And so that's not what's happening when I'm grading their work, not when I'm grading their larger written project. It's happening when I'm actually talking to them in class about the thing that we've been doing, the thing that I'm asking them to practice. And then it's not an illusion. That's when I actually see learning taking place. Or sometimes I can see that learning is not taking place and I can make adjustments, or I can have them make adjustments, and we can continue. But those kinds of conversations are really important. Also, when I'm reading over their participation, I'm kind of skimming over it. And did they write this passage with the rhetorical, using the rhetorical strategy of presence? Are they actually uh, developing some presence in there? Did they do that activity? I can see that. I can see that they practiced it, and then that becomes important. And then I'll also probably be looking for it in their written work later, and that's fantastic. But it's also important to see it, multiple times throughout the semester. And so right now, that's all I have. So thank you. I would just like to end by saying, it's the small everything, everyday things that we can do in the classroom. Tweaking classroom pedagogy to support learning and practice in a piece by piece, bit by bit way will be what yields the best results. It can make a difference in spite of the negative effects AI can have on our learners' education. I just think, that's really important. And like I say, those little interactions to me also have kind of been the most rewarding ones. Where I'm seeing the students sort of engage with the material that we've been working on in class. And so I'll end with that. Thank you so much. It's been uh, great to have you on, and I will be back with another episode as soon as I can. I've got some of them related to AI that I would like to do, others related to teaching that I'd like to do. Things like lesson plans even would, I think, be really appropriate for the podcast, especially over the summer. And maybe we can sort of build up a store of strategies that can be used in the fall. And so thanks again, and I'll sign off for now, and I will see you next time.